Well, over the years, I think since about 2013, the Auditor General's Office has compiled the activities of ministries, departments, and agencies, especially as concerning their finances. And just a few weeks ago, I think it was last week, we had this discussion on a conversation about a document that Sarah produced from the Auditor General's report of 2017, how that something in the region of more than 2 trillion naira is hanging somewhere around, and ministries, departments, and agencies haven't been able to fully account for that. No clarity on that yet. Then we have another one from the Center for Justice, Center for Social Justice, saying that within 2014 and 2017, there is something in the region of 5 trillion naira between the ministries, departments, and agencies that have not been fully recovered for, all from the Auditor General's report between 2014 and 2017. Where does this leave us? And what should we be doing to ensure that this does not continue as a norm? Two gentlemen join us this morning. The Chairman, Senate Committee on Public Accounts, Senator Matthew Urukide, is with us this morning, as well as Mr. Eze Onyekpere, Lead Director, Policy Center for Social Justice. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you, Senator, for joining us for this conversation. Yes, we hope that Mr. Onyekpere will be able to join us later. But then this conversation we have had before. So let me ask you, how far so far? I mean, this one is talking about something, some documents from 2014 to 2017 detailing a figure up to 5.787 trillion naira unauthorized deductions from Federation account by certain key institutions of government.
Well, let me say again, that I appreciate your invitation to me, and I think it's a privilege too that one has now to, say again and again, the duty we owe Nigerians, those of us who represent them. Just like you mentioned, yes, I chair the Senate Committee on Public Accounts, and the only office I superintend really, or that committee superintends, is the office of the Auditor General for the Federation. Of course, his role is very clearly stated in the Constitution, 1999 Constitution, as amended. Section 85, has to do with his role, and Section 86 has to do with his appointment. And for that reason, it's very clear that the Auditor General has to perform, constitutional roles, as enshrined in the Constitution, and of course the Finance Act too. What is expected to do? The office too, is linked, by its function only to the National Assembly, and what it does really is to bring, the auditor reports, of the accounts of the Federation for any particular financial year, and it sends that straight to the clerk of the National Assembly, who in turn sends it to, the two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives, who in turn, send these reports straight to the committees on public accounts of the Senate and of that of the House of Representatives. It is the responsibility of the Committee on Public Accounts, in both houses, to look at these reports and, of course, now to make recommendations, to Senate at plenary and, of course, to the House at plenary. These reports, by way of recommendation, when they are adopted at plenary, they are now sent back again to the executive for adoption. But let me say that, over time, let me even, take it from the period, the advent of the Fourth Republic. The National Assembly really has not been in a position, to look at these reports, as expected. The reports are supposed to be sent in to National Assembly, and the time frame that is given within the, provisions of the Constitution from the Office of Auditor General is to say 90 days after receipt from the Accountant General, the financial statement of the Federation, and then he brings it, to the National Assembly. And National Assembly to now, looks at it and then sends it to the executive. It is expected that within the financial year, all these activities concerned with, budget that is being implemented, and then of course, accounting for, public funds that have been used implementing the budget. These things really have not worked out well. Number one, the provision in the Constitution does not limit the time that the Accountant General has to submit, to the Auditor General financial statement. That again creates a lacuna, and of course, it creates, an infraction, so to speak. And then the National Assembly too is not limited by the time it has to consider the report in a year, and then of course to go to the executive, either by way of provision of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which says that any infraction that is detected, either by the official or by the agency, be sent to the Attorney General of the Federation for possible prosecution in case there are, criminal, deductions, from the report. So what has really not worked out well? First, let us proceed it within the framework of the duty of the Auditor General for the Federation. That is the man that is going to, this year, is going to audit a budget of 13 trillion. The environment has to be good for him. Provisions have to be made so that he's able to look at the accounts of over 650 agencies of government, before bringing to the National Assembly. Recently, I appeared before the committee of the Senate on appropriation, to defend his budget and to find out that the workforce is not there between maybe the establishment approval, and what he has on ground. In his office, he has 1,560, workers, about 670 short of establishment approval, and he will tell you, I cannot do this work. I have to be enabled. Financial consulting, a lot of these things have to be outsourced, before I can put my comments, and queries, where they are necessary. But, the office,
just a quick one. Yes, just a quick one, because there are so many issues. There are so many issues that you have raised. Just a moment, yeah. There are so many issues that you have raised here, and we'll need to recognize them and identify them and take your perspectives, hoping that someone will be able to offer some clarity and way forward. But in the middle of it, there's a lot of money that's been involved over the years, especially in this Fourth Republic. For instance, earlier this year, your chamber, the Senate, raised an alarm that Nigeria's total debt profile is going to rise to some 33 trillion naira with the approval of the $22.7 billion that the foreign loan that the federal government was asking, the executive was asking for. This document that we are looking at now from the Center for Social Justice says that Nigeria may have been shortchanged to the tune that I mentioned the other time, 5.787 trillion naira. The Auditor General's report of 2017, as analyzed by SERAP, also says we have something in the region of 2 trillion naira floating around somewhere. Also recall, Senator, that late last year, the president said we lost about $157 billion to illicit financial flows in this same republic between 2003 and 2012. Now, with these facts, Senator, what is wrong with our fight against corruption? Is it a weakness of the laws, a weakness of the institutions, the anti-corruption policy, or the leadership over the years?
Yes, thank you very much. Let me say that if we are serious in fighting corruption, institutional corruption is where to start from. And what I mean by that, this year's budget, and even the previous years, we have about 70% that goes to personnel, and then of course for overheads, and about 30% will go to capital. These MDAs that spend all of this money, for the three subheads, how do we check them? I first mentioned some time ago when I came on this program that we have found out that there are agencies of government from the time of inception or from their inception, they have never been able to audit their accounts. It doesn't happen in other climes. In Britain, in America, whatever it is, their system of government, anybody that must spend money in a year must have accounted for what was appropriated the preceding year.
That's curious. If you would ask me, just a moment, Senator. Just a moment. You said this thing before, just as you have said. Just a moment. Just a moment.
Is the reason.
Yes, just a moment.
We cannot trace.
Now you just
no proper auditing system.
Yes, you talked about institutional corruption now, and I'm wondering, and everyone is wondering, how come we have agencies in their tens, some would say in their hundreds, that we have not been able to audit, yet every year they get budgetary allocations? How come?
I cannot really explain that, because the Parliament or the National Assembly, the way it is, we can do recommendations, to the executive for implementation. And when we find out some of these infractions, that of course we believe should not be in existence in our system, and we mention them. I mean, first, I just mentioned it to you now. For the Auditor General to perform his duty, he needs to have the right staff. This budget, what was agreed was 247 new employees because of those that have left the service and those who have retired. For him to be able to look at the books of all of these agencies, he doesn't have the right staff. 247. There was no budgetary provision for him. And he came. And of course, I've done the recommendation. The committee has done the recommendation to appropriation. If you put the 247 staff for him to be able to look at the accounts of all these agencies, even if all these agencies submit audited reports, accounts to him, who will vet them? One man that is sitting down there cannot vet all of this. So if we are serious, make the environment, strengthen the office, give him the right budget, give him the right instrument. It doesn't work for the executive, it works with the National Assembly. That will make his report to be credible. And if we really want to say this man is the one that audits the account of the trillions we budget every year, just like you mentioned, the Center for Social Justice and all of that, they have said, oh, these things are hanging somewhere, these sums of money. Those reports could be true. Because if proper auditing has not been done of all the accounts of these agencies, then of course there must be missing links, no doubt about that, in our expenditure profile. So if we want to do it, please, we are saying it. I have said it again. The Senate were able to pass the federal audit bill. Let us strengthen that office. Let us be honest. Let us be serious. The sense of patriotism some of us have is to say, look, let us do things that will conform with international standards. I mean, if we say this is this office, please let us recognize it. There's an office. Not when corruption is already consummated, is perfected, before you start saying you want to audit the books. Everywhere an auditor, financial audit is different from value for money audit with performance audit. We're back on projects in this country. I'm not saying it because, there's one particular party in government. It has been happening from our inception from the First Republic. And it's been worse. In fact, even in the Fourth Republic from 1999. It is only now that we even have a president that is fighting corruption, that agencies honor our invitations to come and give account of what is given to them. So by the time we come up with our reports and it gets back to the executive, please use the hammer so that agencies will know you cannot spend public money without accounting for it. It beats me hollow when it is that agencies, they rush for budget defense, they come and tell you budget performance for a particular year, whereas the audited accounts, they are not there. The audited reports, they are not there. How can you keep giving money to agencies that do not account for what they got previously? It shouldn't be.
That's a big question.
Groups and concerned, patriotic, individuals come up with some of these things. We should really listen to them and correct our procedures and processes.
Right, Senator. In fact, that question you asked is perhaps what's on the mind of a lot of Nigerians. How come? But this latest analysis was published by CenSuch, that's the Center for Social Justice. And we have joining us this morning, right beside Senator, the lead director, Policy Center for Social Justice, Eze Onyekpere. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Good morning.
Well, you're also a lawyer with specialization in development law. So I know that this is really something you're interested in, especially because now we have a report, something we can always refer to. But please help us understand this, okay? So between 2014 and 2017, The sum of 5.787 trillion naira was illegally deducted by key FG revenue generating agencies just in 4 years. 5.7 trillion naira. Help Nigerians understand, how is this even possible?
Well, the report was done by looking at the reports for the 4 years from the Auditor General for the Federation, 2014, 15, 16, and 17, and it clearly stated that between the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, Department of Petroleum Resources, and the Federal Inland Revenue Services, a total of 5.876 trillion was held back from the Federation account, which is the distributable pool account for sharing between the three tiers of government. The NNPC on its own had about 4.5 trillion out of this as the chief culprit. So you know how auditing is done. The Auditor General and his team comes, they look at the books which you have presented, and from there they see if there are infractions and issues they need to raise. And when they raise these issues, they get back to you in form of queries for you to explain. They only obscurely to put it in their report, which will be sent to the PAC, only when your answer or response is not satisfactory and did not address the issues. So clearly speaking, that is what happened, and they've not been able to come forward to clear themselves because they make all kinds of deductions from the money that they should transfer to the Federation account, contrary to the spirit and letter of Section 162 of the Constitution. Mind you, the Auditor General is not the one who makes the laws. He's not the author of the norms. He is looking at the laws and policies vis-a-vis what the activities and the conduct of the particular MD or agency. So that is a position that is only for 3 revenue generating agencies. There are a lot of other infractions. People simply collected withholding tax, VAT, payee, agencies collected it and withheld it without remitting it to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. There were all kinds of loans and advances that were not accounted for. There were issues of store items, okay? You said you procured 50 billion naira worth of goods, and when they went to the store, because you said it has not been distributed, nothing was in the store, and there was no evidence that it has been taken out. There were agencies where people were traveling outside the country, contrary to the public service rules that say you can't continue doing trainings and all manner of courses without approval of the head of service because we want to conserve money. There were also those who did medical tourism abroad, contrary to the public service rules. We talked about getting permission from the head of service and the medical treatment not being available in Nigeria. Of course, there was over-invoicing and inflation of contracts. There was also deviation and refusal to go through approval threshold so that you don't go to obtain the certificate of no objection. So a whole plethora, it was as if to say it was open season. In 2016, 160 agencies refused to report to the Auditor General. Because there was no penalty for that breach, by 2017, 265 agencies, that is 105 more. And the Auditor General states that 11 agencies since inception have failed, refused, and neglected to report. While I agree with the Senator that we need audit reforms in terms of the Federal Audit Service Commission bill, but the laws as it is today provides for sanctions, particularly the financial regulations. If you look at the Public Procurement Act, there are offenses, penalties, and punishments for violating that act. Even the financial regulations talks about whose duty it is to account for revenue and public money. It's the duty of the accounting officer, the permanent secretary, the executive secretary, and if there is a shortfall, he has an obligation to recover it from any of the staff under him. If he is the one responsible, between the president, head of service, the secretary to the government of the federation, they should take steps to recover the money.
Yes, just a quick one on that, Mr. Onyekwere.
Exercise in report writing.
Yes, just a moment on that one, when you mentioned that the chief accounting officer of an MDA is a permanent secretary. There are quotes in the Auditor General's report over the years mentioning the names or the offices of specific officers, like the permanent secretary, the managing director of the agency, the director general, that they should account for specific funds that are missing in that report. And the auditor would say they have written to so-so person to provide more information or, receipts or invoices as to this payment or that payment. And from what you're saying, it would seem like there has been no responses. What does the law say about any kind of punitive action for such infraction and such a refusal to come forward with the facts?
In fact, the financial instructions are specific and clear. In some infractions, like when you mismanage money, they talk about giving a query and the time to respond to the query. And if the response is not satisfactory, it is clearly stated that such money should be deducted from the remuneration of the particular officer. And it also talks about where you can get all of those things, handing the officer over either to the police, the EFCC, or the ICPC. And that brings us to what we call the pillars of integrity. There should be a collaboration between one, the Auditor General, the Public Accounts Committee, the anti-corruption agencies, the media like we are doing today, and civil society, and key officials in the executive who have oversight over these chief executives, so that one expects that once the Auditor General finishes his work, also the PSC finishes his work, the ICPC and EFCC will just pick the reports and take a look at them. For instance, some of the chief executives left office and took their vehicles, the SUVs that they were using, contrary to the financial regulations. What shows you that if government wants to work, it will work? It is deliberate that they're not doing their work. Is that, for instance, in the National Assembly, when there was a crisis of the clerk going or not going, and then the powers that be has some interest, he was made to leave. And as soon as he left, the EFCC went after him to collect all the SUVs and the vehicles he took. But others documented in the report of the Auditor General, nobody went after them. So the laws as it is today has enough provisions, if implemented, to make sure that monies are recovered. For instance, the Auditor General reported a situation in the FCDA where the management there simply said, we gave away 500 million naira to security. Which security? No documentation, no voucher, no evidence, unappropriated expenditure. In some agencies, they are simply saying they spend money, they can't produce the backup documents. Okay. No vouchers, nothing to show.
Just a moment, Mr. Ebere. Just a moment. There's still a lot more to say, but let me ask, Senator Orogide. Now, part of the things that's the responsibility of the Senate are the Senate committees, where they have oversight functions on some of these ministries, departments, and agencies. Is there a role they can or have been playing or should be playing in ensuring accountability, of the MDAs?
Yes, yes. Thank you. Just like the standing committees of the Senate, oversights, MDAs, and once appropriation is done, it is expected that through oversight, we'll be able to check, a lot of these, malfeasance, and outside of processes and procedures, yes, it is true. The Parliament or the National Assembly, should be able to check this to some extent. But, there are a few things too that even the standing committees might not even be able to know. Just like Mr. Onyekode said, because I'm in public accounts, and because of, my deep acquisition, I have found out, for instance, that what is budgeted in the central pool, what we call service-wide votes. Service-wide vote is administered from the office of Minister of Finance, and particularly under the office of the Accountant General, of the Federation. This is money that is budgeted, put in a pool. I mean, to meet maybe with shortfalls in the current and capital expenditures. For instance, if it is an election that is being organized somewhere, you need to send the police. All these are unforeseen, circumstances, at the time of considering a national budget. And disbursements are made from the service-wide votes. These disbursements that are made from service-wide votes, oftentimes the standing committees do not even know how much is being disbursed. And when you are doing budget appraisal or budget performance, some of these agencies do not even disclose this. Oh, this is what we got from service-wide vote, because they do those applications straight to the president or to the minister, and they are given. When you go to do oversight function, and this revelation is not made by these agencies, how do you know? So I in fact recently I drew the attention of the appropriation committee. Service-wide vote, what you put there is humongous. It's big sums of money. Like in this year, but it's almost 700 and something billion. If it's going to be disbursed in course of the financial year, it is important that those disclosures must be made, and people are made to account for it. So I don't want to tell you that even when you go to carry out oversight function, which is a statutory function, it is still there that unless these revelations are made and you are following these figures, you are tracking them, you will never be able to know. I agree with you that strict oversight function will reduce this, this laxity, of no accounting for what is given to agencies, as budget, in the year. But I just believe if we are able to, through oversight, and complement efforts with the office, that is the Auditor General for the Federation, that is charged with the responsibility. And if you see what obtains now, if we are to follow a stricter censor, it does not even make it possible for us to track our funds or track
Senator,
our resources.
So many other issues to raise as far as this matter is concerned.
Right on point. When he said
we'll come back.
Does not really carry out.
Yes, we'll come back to more of this. Okay. When we come back from this break. Thanks for staying with us, Senator. It would seem like the Senate over the years has been helpless and quiet, given the explanation that you just gave now, that the Senate committees are unable to perform their statutory duties for one reason or another, and they keep recycling budget allocations to the same MDAs that have been flouting the law. Where do we go from here?
No. I didn't say that the Senate has been helpless. I mean, these things are, what we have to do. They are dictated, in our laws, and regulations. We too have to play within the provisions of these laws. The extant acts are there. The Appropriation Act, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, financial regulations. They are out there, and whatever has to be done. Infractions that are detected by the Office of the Auditor General must be things that are done outside of these acts, and financial regulation. And of course, when he discovers these infractions, for him to even first discover the infractions, that's what we are saying. The office must be enabled so that he'll be able to look at the financial, transactions of all these agencies, compare them with the provisions of these acts to say this is right or this is wrong. When it is wrong, it becomes a query, and that is where we come in. So it is really the responsibility of the Office of the Auditor General that must carry out the constitutional role. If this role is carried out, then of course the Parliament or the National Assembly will be in a better position to look at all of these accounts. Not that a few of them will bring their accounts, because the financial statement has not come early from the Accountant General to the Auditor General. There's a delay, and when it comes to the Auditor General, he doesn't have the workforce, because he has to assess some of these things for people to, some other experts, to look at these accounts. Just like the agencies too must get the services of external auditors to look into their books, and that's what I'm saying. And it's not only financial audit the Auditor General has to do. He has to do performance audit. He has to do other forms of audit, particularly the value for money. The whole essence of it all is to ensure transparency, accountability, and economy in public spending. And that is what the Public Accounts Committee is charged with. So if we are able to collaborate effort with him, if the reports do not come in from the Auditor General, what can the Senate Committee on Public Accounts do when it comes to, vetting, the queries that come out from the Office of the Auditor General? The reports don't come. But what we are saying, let us make it possible for the Auditor General to perform so that he can turn in the reports, so that the committees can look at these reports. The one I mentioned is that, the same Auditor General that must be able to discover some of these things, like I mentioned, the service-wide votes. If the service-wide votes, the disbursement from it is not exposed to the Auditor General or to the standing committees when we are doing oversight, there's no way you can know. It's only when I write, my office maybe will write to the Accountant General to say, furnish us with disbursement for service wide. We do not know what it is. But what I'm saying, you must have a starting point in all of this. Whether it is accusation that is coming from these other agencies, these NGOs that are involved in it, the Auditor General's office can really readily assist in detecting where these infractions are coming from. If he's empowered.
Senator,
and what we are saying, let the office be empowered. Right. If the present laws are not strong enough, let us make amendment to our laws so that he too be able to perform that role, just like it happens in other claims. So that is the point to make.
Right. a lot of people wonder why we've not had the reports for 2018, 2019, 2020, but I guess that's tied to the point you just made, which we'll explore in a moment. But Mr. Oyekpere, you know, the Auditor General made recommendations at that time in those reports, and one of them is a recommendation to the Accountant General of the Federation that all deductions made at source should be stopped, as it violated Section 162 of the 1999 Constitution. That was one. Another recommendation that was made is that in view of those unauthorized deductions, all the defaulting agencies should be appropriately sanctioned. I'm not sure I caught that in that analysis you made, but in this case, what would an appropriate sanction be?
Well, to understand the situation and contextualize it, the NNPC, which is the most guilty party in holding back money from Federation account, is under the control of the Minister of Petroleum. And who is the Minister of Petroleum? The President and Commander-in-Chief. The other minister is a mere Minister of State. So that goes back beyond Section 162 to Section 5 of the Constitution, where the executive powers of the Federation are vested in the President. So we should ask, why has the President not taken up this challenge to return this money to Treasury? Now, what is the problem with our auditing process is follow up, not just what the Auditor General discovers or what the PAC does. Follow up on those recommendations. In a country like Ghana, we have a situation where the Auditor General has the powers, constitutional powers, to surcharge anybody who has caused a loss to the Treasury. And also, like the recommendations of the Auditor General, if it is for individuals who are not accounting officers working in a ministry, department, or agency, it is the permanent secretary, executive secretary, and accounting officer who has the responsibility to ensure that that money is recovered. If it is accounting officer himself, then it falls back to the presidency to do the needful. But coming back to what Distinguished has said, talking about service-wide votes and the humongous amounts of money, we have written severally in our budget analysis that that should be stopped. You cannot simply go like in 2021, you have SDG 1, 200, about 40 billion, SDG 2, 30 billion, SDG 3. You list 6 things that are nebulous, have no meaning, for a vote of about 150 billion. Why do you appropriate it in the first place? The fact that there will be elections and police will be deployed is already known before time. So that money should go to the police. Don't bring all the money for sports under service-wide votes. Give it to the Ministry of Youths. If you are doing infrastructure under SDGs, give it to the Ministry of Works. Don't pull this thing. What has happened consistently is that a slush fund is pulled together under the Presidency and Ministry of Finance, which is not accounted for. And that is what Distinguished is saying. We are of the view that not more than 2 or 3% of the overall budget should be under that service-wide vote, particularly where we also have a contingency vote from which you can take money for unforeseen circumstances. And most of what he has mentioned are not unforeseen. They are daily occurrences. And that brings me back to the audit bill he talked about, which was passed by the 8th National Assembly. That was one bill that fell through the cracks. The president neither returned it with excuses or reasons for not assenting to the bill, neither did he assent to it. And as of today, it just fell through the cracks. And we are expecting this 9th National Assembly to bring that bill back as expeditiously as possible so that it will be passed, given back to the president, and there will be no reason, because it appears the powers that be want to subjugate that office of the Auditor General, which is the foremost anti-corruption office in the country. It's a constitutional office which is supreme. Both the EFCC and ICPC are creatures of statute, which are inferior laws compared to the Constitution. But go and look at their budgets, vis-a-vis the budget of the Auditor General. Most of their budget double and treble the budget of the Auditor General, which is
Mr. Oyekpere, just a moment. Now, you mentioned the Office of the Auditor General, and then you also mentioned, something about the budget. Now, it would seem, from what you have said, that the Office of the Auditor General, the Office of the Accountant General, and the Budget Office are at variance. Because one would assume that if they compared books, what you said about the deductions from source will probably, have been affected. How significant would that be? Or do you think it is a good thing for those three agencies or offices to operate at variance? Or do you think there should be a handshake at some point among these three offices?
Definitely, they should collaborate to harmonize their books. But the Auditor General by law and by convention, international standards, must work independently. It hasn't got to be subsumed with what others are saying. It looks at the books prepared by these two key agencies you mentioned, Budget Office and Accountant General, to express an opinion on whether they kept the accounts properly. The last report of 2017 gave a qualified opinion, which means that he did not come to the conclusion that what is supposed to be done in accordance with laws and policies have been done. But consistently, he has found these deductions objectionable. And if you link this up with the refusal to pass the Petroleum Industry Bill, or even when it was passed in the 8th National Assembly, the refusal to assent to that bill, that gives you the context that some people are benefiting from this confusion, these deductions in the petroleum industry. And if you change the laws and enact transparent fiscal processes, administrative processes, as will the PIBs anticipate, it will take away that slush shoot pond of money. Imagine we are having 5.876 trillion hanging at a time our deficit proposed for 2021 is about 5.2 trillion. Out of it, we want to borrow about 4.2 trillion. So if we recover that pot of funds alone, we may plug the proposed deficit for 2021. And by the time you look at the whole money contained between 2014 and 2017 or this, you'll be talking of between 8 and 10 trillion. We may not even need to borrow. So all we need to do is to set our house in order. And I don't want to believe that the National Assembly is helpless.
Just a moment. Even on that, just a moment, Mr. Yekwere, just a moment. Now, you have copiously quoted, the infractions, if I can use the word, of the NNPC over and over again. It would have been wonderful to have them here because we reached out to the NNPC and a number of other MDAs to come and, have their own say as well as to why these things happen, but we do not have that yet. Now, you have also referenced the fact that perhaps there are some weaknesses in some laws. Is it a weakness of the laws or the weakness of the enforcement of the ones that we have at this moment? And who is culpable here?
We need to reform the laws we have, but within the context of the present law, there are still opportunities to bring people to book.
In specifics? What laws specifically are you talking about?
Okay. For instance, the Public Procurement Act talks about punishment for over-invoicing. It talks about punishment for splitting of tenders. It talks about punishment for collusion and collaboration to make sure that you defeat the ends of fitness of purpose or inflation of contracts. Then if you look at the section 162 of the Constitution, it is clear about how money should be gotten and remitted to that account. And the president has a duty as the chief executive of the Federation to enforce that law. And his failure to enforce it should attract some sanction or some stricture from the National Assembly. And that's why I'm saying I don't want to agree that the National Assembly is helpless. If you have failed to bring your audited accounts before the Auditor General and therefore the Public Accounts Committee since inception, like 11 agencies have done, once they come for appropriation, you tell them we cannot dignify you with entertaining you to go and receive more money, which you are not going to account for.
Does the law permit the committees to say that? Mr. Yekwere, does the law permit
Assembly, not just
just a moment. Does the law permit any committee to make that recommendation, and does the law permit the Senate to withhold the monies belonging to that's been budgeted or assigned for budgeting for these agencies in the event that they do not?
The law says the National Assembly should exercise oversight over the generation, allocation, and management of public resources. And that law that gives them that power is the fundamental law of the land, which is the Constitution. So that power is there to say, take steps, concrete steps and measures to ensure that you comply with the requirement of accountability. And if you don't account, there's no need giving you more money. Even if it's not punishment for the agency, they can take a stand to say, until this particular chief executive who is not accountable is removed, we are not appropriating any money for that agency.
But that has not happened, Mr. Yekwere. Just a moment. That has not happened over the years. Does that mean that the Senate or the National Assembly is culpable?
I'm not looking at culpability. I'm saying what they should have done. I'm not here to indict anybody, but I'm saying
I mean, let's be clear.
The Senate President or the Speaker, this is what I would have done.
Okay, now that has not been done. In other words, there are laws or there are recommendations of the law that the National Assembly ought to have enforced that they have not. Is that what you're saying?
That is exactly what I'm saying, that they have the constitutional power to compel. Even if they invite somebody and he doesn't come, they can issue a warrant of arrest for the person and not just allow him to come and pretend he fainted and then that's the end of it. They say, carry go. They say, go and see no more. Nigeria has crossed that stage. We are borrowing money to pay salaries. Why are we leaving our money in the hands of a few private individuals who have converted the Commonwealth to their personal purpose?
Just quickly.
The National Assembly is in a position to compel them.
Right. Quickly, before I take this back to Senator, is there a way we can get back that 5.7 trillion naira? Is it even possible remotely?
Yes, we can get it back if there's collaboration between the presidency, the National Assembly, the EFCC, the ICPC, the media, and our good selves in civil society, who I collectively dub the pillars of integrity. If we insist and make sure we sensitize Nigerians, we hold these people accountable. They are not spirits. They are simply men with a feet of clay. There is nothing special in them that if you shake them up, they will not cough out the money.
That sounds like a good idea.
Law is the command of the sovereign backed by sanctions. If you remove sanctions, there is no law.
Sounds like a good idea. Senator, when he said that the law empowers the National Assembly to, as it were, make these decisions, withhold, the budgetary allocation and say, well, if this is not done, then you're not getting this. What has stopped the National Assembly from enacting or at least standing on this law and doing what it ought to do?
Now, let me say, with due respect to Mr. Onyekwere, right now we don't have, any law, okay, on which the National Assembly can stand on, to withhold any budget to any agency. We just cannot. I mean, take for instance, if an agency that has, Nigerians in its employment will hold back their budget and they don't have money for personnel to pay salaries. And they go and say, oh, we don't have money to pay your salary because the National Assembly is holding our money. Or they don't appropriate, money to us this year. What is going to happen? We don't have the law. That is why the Federal Audit Bill, that is specifying more stringent measures for both the accounting officers and then of course the agencies themselves, that are found, to be in default. If that bill had been passed or had been assented to by Mr. President, as passed by the 8th National Assembly, maybe we would have been talking differently. We don't have any law we can stand on now to effect that. We can't hold back the budget of any agency. We have said it before, even the Senate. We are going to hold back. You threaten them, you bring them before the National Assembly. There is no law. In fact, we are not enforcers. The Parliament cannot enforce any decision, just like our own resolutions from our motions. Whereas they are sent to the executive for implementation or for execution. And anything we find, errant agencies or individuals, the same if you check the Fiscal Responsibility Act, what it says, you do the recommendation to the Attorney General, who now looks at it. It's still the executive that will take charge of it from there. Unless we amend our present laws, there is nothing we can do. National Assembly has no right to hold back the budget of any agency or government that we have found is errant because they have not been able to submit their audited accounts over the years. And then, of course, maybe the chief executives of those places, we do not have the right to go and prosecute. It is the executive that has the right to go and prosecute. Unless we amend our present laws, there's nothing really National Assembly can do. We'll look at the reports. Our recommendations.
Senator, just a quick one. Just a quick one, Senator. Are you saying, right now? Just a moment, are you saying that when in 2013 the National Assembly withheld the budget assigned to Securities and Exchange Commission, that the National Assembly acted against the law?
You see, it was a committee really that was oversighting, that agency of government, if you remember, and I think it was even in the House of Representatives. What happened was that the committee refused to look at their budget. When it came to budget defense, that was what the committee did. It was not a decision of the National Assembly. It was the committee that was oversighting that agency of government. I think it was SEC or so. That refused to look at their budgets. So yes, you can say, well, as a committee, we are not looking at your budget. Okay. And then, of course, it will now be on, the House, to decide on what to do. All right? But there is no law that permits us now, to withhold the budget of any.
But there is,
neither do we have any law which we can stand to say this person is guilty. The person can only be recommended by the provision of Fiscal Responsibility Act for now.
But there is the authority of that committee of the National Assembly through any. Just a moment. Just a moment. There is a responsibility on the part of a committee of the National Assembly to ensure that the needful is done, such as oversight. And one would assume that oversight also means oversighting their budgets, their spendings, and they are returning the money.
Yeah. Yes, you oversight. You can. What you want to do is to ensure that there's maximum functionality of the agency of government. Blocking leakages and all of that. You can only point them out. If I oversight the Auditor General, for the Federation, if for instance his office commits an infraction, I can only report him. All right, as the committee, I report him to the Senate at plenary, and the Senate, if the Senate takes my recommendation, they pass it to the executive to deal with him. I do not have the police force, I do not have the FCC, I do not have ICPC to go and deal with him.
Okay.
All right, so any resolution, any decision that is taken by Parliament, as we operate within the confines of our constitution right now, and our own extant laws, the recommendation can only be given to the executive for implementation.
Okay, we're winding down on this conversation, but Mr. Oyukbere, do you agree with Senator on that point?
Well, he did not say that committee that refused to look at that budget committed an illegality. So somehow he has come round to appreciate what I'm saying. The point is that a constitution, the highest law in the land, gives you power to exercise oversight. Every power you are given must have some consequential issues following it up. You don't just sit on public money and then continue bringing your budget for me to look at. And I've made recommendations upon recommendations, which appears you are acting in concert with whoever appointed you. I have no obligation under the Constitution to continue to collaborate and support you. I have
we have to sign it out now.
Elected as a representative of the people.
Well, we just have to thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of this conversation this morning. Mr. Eze Oyekpere is Lead Director of Policy, Center for Social Justice, as well as a lawyer with specialization in development law, and alongside Senator Matthew Urogide, Chairman, Senate Committee on Public Accounts. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts this morning.